Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Fletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, Becca, Lory, Hector returns to Autism Stories to discuss her new book, Always Bring Your Sunglasses, and other stories from a life of sensory and social invalidation. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Becca, thanks so much for making your return to Autism Stories. It's been a while, but I'm so thankful that you're back.
It is my absolute pleasure. I love doing Autism Stories. Every time you ask, I will always say yes. I promise.
Well, I wanted to have you back because you just recently brought a new wonderful book to the world titled Always Bring Your Sunglasses and Other Stories from a Life of Sensory and Social Invalidation. Before talking about your book, I'd really love to learn about the teamwork that it took to bring the book to us, the masses. One of your teammates is your publisher, Difference Press. What was it about this publishing company, Difference Press, that you decided you wanted to work with them?
Well, for me, it was kind of the way that the universe always works for you. It's just synchronicity, right? When I am trying to do anything, let me not say for general people, I keep my eyes out for signs and such things that I should be working more with certain people, or if it's someone that I like. In fact, I just recently saw a meme, and this is what I've been saying to myself in my head. If it doesn't add to my fulfillment, it's just noise, right? So that's how I've been trying to clear myself out. And so I was living in a space where I was having too much noise. There was like a ton of noise, and I had just moved and all of that kind of stuff. But whatever, I was ready to write this book. But as a writer, it's really a scary endeavor to write a book, especially here I am in my 40s, right? And I've been wanting to write a book since I was 16. So like a real low pressure type event for me, right? Like no pressure. So getting started was really scary for me. And it's different. It's a different kind of writing to write a book than to write a blog or to write, a journal article, right? And I honestly was just floating in a space of, I don't know what to do. And then Angela Lory came into my life. And if those of you who don't know Angela Lory, she is co-host of the podcast, the Autistic Culture Podcast with Matt Lory. If you haven't heard it, or don't, go check it out. Go follow all of them. They're hilarious. And I love them. And so I had worked with Angela through the Autistic Culture Podcast. I had her come on. We had done some work in the community around the Autistic Culture Podcast. And in learning about her, I found out that not only is she an author, but she's a publisher. And I started to talk to her about it. And lo and behold, she is the founder of Difference Press. And her specialty is helping people to write the books that they want to write. And it was that easy for me. It was like that synchronicity. Because I had already really liked Angela. Like you and I got along, Angela and I got along. And I was like, no, I definitely want to work more with her. I just need to we needed the project. And this was the project, right? To get to work together. So honestly, I give her in the dedication credit because I was in a really stuck autistic place where I knew I had this big project ahead of me. I knew what I wanted it to look like in the end, but I didn't know how to get there, right? I didn't know how to piece it apart. And Angela helped me to do that. And then she cheered me on like a good coach along the way so I didn't get unmotivated and stop halfway through and all of those things. And so it was really a pleasure to work with her, and we'll be working on lots more projects together. You guys keep your eyes out because things will be coming.
For me, the brilliance of your book is that as an artistic person, I felt seen, heard, and validated reading it. However, at the same time, I think you give a guide, or maybe I should say a master class to loved ones of autistic people, how they can positively help change the trajectory of our lives. What was your process in making sure that both autistic people and their loved ones got so much value out of your book?
Well, I hope that they do. And I think my process was the process that I use when I do any of my speaking engagements, which sounds silly, but a lot of writers, their writing voice is different than the way that they are in life. But my writing voice is very much my speaking voice right? And so for me, it was like, okay, I want to take the questions that I get asked by parents, the things that, other autistics, which their families knew, right, about them and all that. And there's also this piece of me that is very aware that the generation of us that are late diagnosed people and lived a good portion of our lives without the knowledge of our autism, we're going to get old and die, and our story isn't going to be around anymore. Everyone who's following us has a much clearer understanding of autism. We're doing a lot more early intervention. We know more, right? We're catching more people. So that story was important for me to document. I felt that, the legacy for us of those late diagnosed folks that missed out on a lot of opportunities or had a lot of struggles that weren't necessary for us to have. But I think ultimately the book wasn't really for anybody else but me and my mom, which may be the secret to the book in and of itself, right? I didn't write it for autistic adults. I didn't write it for parents. I didn't write it for professionals. I wrote it for me, and I wrote it as a love letter to my mom because I didn't have the answers she was looking for when I got diagnosed. 11 years later, I have those answers for her, right? I can be able to put those together. I have that information. And so that's what this book is. It's those things. It's remember when this happened to me as a kid, this is what it was, right? Let's reframe it. And that's really what it is. It's that conversation, if it could happen between the two of us.
So when I talk about my autism, a word that I hear more and more people say to me is, "Oh, thank you for being vulnerable, for sharing your thoughts and feelings on the subject." And almost every time someone says it to me, I don't feel like I'm being vulnerable. I think I'm just expressing autistic communication. I'm being direct and clear. So with your book, it definitely seemed like, I guess I'm doing the thing that people did to me, I'm doing to you right now. I'm saying that it definitely seemed like you were being vulnerable with a lot of your stories you told. How did you go about deciding what you wanted to share and what stories you wanted to keep to yourself when writing this book?
That was a process. I think innately we all know kind of the things we're ready to share and the things we're not ready to share. And I think that's about knowing your healing process. So I know if I'm healed from something, I'm comfortable sharing it and laughing about it and all of that. If I'm still having, it still triggers me and I'm still working through it, maybe I'm not quite ready to talk about it in public, right? That's sort of and I never talk about my sex life because my poor husband, that would be terrible, right? Those are really my limits because I don't want to put salt in my own wounds. It's already a vulnerable place to be openly autistic, period, right? And so I don't need to do any more damage to myself than the world will already do to me, right? And so I don't add to it. I don't add to my suffering. And so the stories that I ended up choosing, so of course the ones that made the book versus the ones that are in existence are, it's a really small percentage of the stories of my life and the ones that, when I think back on it. But these were the ones to me that once I understood my autism, I could look back and be like, oh, snap. See, if you guys knew that when that was happening, we would have had it totally, right? Yeah. And so those were the stories that I wanted people to understand. And the stories of, and sort of the autistic perspective on those happenings. Because often we hear the parent perspective because young children don't talk about their lives. Okay. Right. And so we hear the parent perspective about their kids, but we don't often hear, the voice of what it's like to be that kid in that moment. Right. And what was going on for us. So I talk about in there, I used to spend a lot of time kind of just alone swimming. And to me, I loved that time. That was my alone time. I was in sensory heaven. I was free to be with my imagination with nobody bothering me, right? But to the adults on the outside, I'm sure I look like a weird kid that for hours would be alone in a pool and come out all wrinkly and not once ask for a snack or go to the bathroom or like whatever, right? And I'm sure there were judgments around those. But I wanted people to see the other side of it. Like what was going on for me was that I was actually pretty joyful in those moments. And people were interrupting and stealing my joy when they would take that stuff away from me. And so those were the stories. But mostly it's that I was well past and healed on them. And I was like, okay, I'm okay if people because the world is cruel. I'm okay if people make fun of it on social media. And I'm okay if, people say that's not true about what is a very true story in my life, right? Because that's what happens to us out there. And those are the ones that I picked. And then, of course, we lump them together by theme. Like, these are the stories I want to tell. Well, what do they have in common? And how do I make them a chapter? Which Angela helped me with the time.
One of the most impactful moments in the book for me was when you discuss grief, and I'm so thankful you did. As you know, I've been going through grief with the loss of my mom over these last several months. And I'm just wondering, I've been thinking more about grief in terms of burnout recently, and whether it's the loss of a loved one, learning we're autistic later in life, or maybe many other forms of grief. I'm wondering how grief in these different forms you feel like has impacted you in terms of autistic burnout through different moments and times in your life.
Well, grief is such an interesting emotion to me. It's like, first of all, fortunately, most of us don't experience it until we're much later in life. So by the time we experience it, it's a really intricate emotion, right? And it's tied to a lot of other things. And so the thing about grief that is perhaps the most distressing is that it never really goes away, right? If we're grieving something, it's because we can't get it back. That's where the grief is coming from. So literally, you will never be able to get it back, and you'll probably always be sad about it to some extent. What they say about grief, though, is that we grow around our grief, right? So the grief itself doesn't go anywhere, but we continue to evolve and grow around our grief. But what that looks like for autistic people is, of course, different from everybody else, just like everything else about us, right? And so a lot of us struggle with alexithymia or any other number of issues around interoception and understanding, our emotions and feeling them and naming them and, all of that stuff. And then paying attention to them and giving a shit about them. Sometimes we don't even are taught not to do that, right? There's a lot of weirdness around that. And we certainly take more processing time than most people for not just grief, but everything else, right? And so what that looks like is many of us aren't instant criers, right? Oh, someone's dead, bawling on the TV, right? That's what happens when they show you. That's what grief is supposed to look like, Doug. When you find out, it must be immediate tears, right? That's not how we process emotions. Some of us don't feel that sadness that comes with tears until our brain has a time to understand what the implications of this missing person are, right? And for us, it can be an interruption in our routines, the way we do our holidays, right? It could be all of these weird places that grief comes up. And then because they're already, unexpected places for us, but then they're usually different from the majority of people's places where things come up, it's a real struggle for us to just be accepted in our grief even, right? Like our grief isn't even right, just like our joy isn't even right, and all of those things. And so that's why I think grief is that kind of process, but that we have to remember it really just doesn't go anywhere. So we can't be in a process of trying to make it go away because it doesn't. What we need to be is in a process of growing around it, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm trying. Really.
I know it. It's no easy task.
No, it definitely is an easy task. Something I learned about you in this book that I probably shouldn't have been surprised to learn about you is that you were labeled gifted in school. At being gifted and talented programs. And I think you talked about how they always seemed that they were designed to speed up depression, anxiety, and burnout.
Absolutely.
So further, these programs, admission, you wrote about in your book about how they rely on narrow definitions of accomplishment. So in what ways do you think these programs should look at their admission process or this whole definition of accomplishment or success?
I think we have to remember that we made a couple of mistakes in general in schools that aren't just to the gifted and talented programs. Like school is right now designed like we're all the same, and obviously we're all not the same, and we all have different needs, and so right. So that's like the basic parts of where that begins. But when we start to separate kids, and this goes in all directions. If we separate them as gifted and talented, or we separate them as special needs and put them in another classroom, right? The minute that we start separating people from each other, we create a hierarchy, right? And there's a pressure that comes with that hierarchy. right? For those on the lower end of that hierarchy, right, there's pressure to be quote unquote normal, right? Or to do things at a level that they're not capable of yet, perhaps, right? And at the same time, on the other side of the scale, when we talk about gifted and talented kids, the expectation is that they should suddenly be adults, right? All of a sudden, they should just be brilliant at everything else too, right? And know how to do all these, oh, you're a gifted math student. Of course, you know how to do laundry and your taxes and, right? Like, no one taught me. So right? So it's a really like messed up thing. But for those of us that are autistic, and especially for me, I was in this situation that I was in the New York City public schools, which was already overcrowded, right? So we're in large classes, which does not help for one-on-one attention, right? Already. And at the same time, what we were looking at in terms of what made somebody gifted and talented or have changed now a little bit. At that time, there was the expectation that if you were good at one thing, if you were gifted in that one area, you should therefore be gifted in all areas, right? And that didn't work for me because what I know now is that I have dyscalculia. And so, of course, I stuck at math. And no one was helping me with my learning disability to get through it. So maybe I could have been good at math. But they were always just berating me about my mathness. And because I was so good at English, right, I must have been lazy and stubborn and not wanting to do my math. I couldn't possibly be needing help. That would be absurd, right? And so what that creates is competition. Because the other students that were gifted in all areas, they're better than, right? And so then where do I fit? And already the journey to not belonging has begun. And I really think that it's exactly in those moments where people were trying to box me into boxes that I didn't belong in, that's when I started to understand I didn't belong in the world.
There were so many moments in this book that I loved. One of them was relating to McDonald's. So we won't even get into McDonald's and chicken nuggets and fries. I just encourage everyone to read that beautiful description.
Yeah, chapter 7 and McDonald's. If you read it, I am happy to do commercials. I am happy for coupons. I am a loyal customer.
Becca, I was thinking the same thing. Like, we need to get you and McDonald's hooked up and some type of sponsorship. We really need to make this happen.
Right.
But another, really important moment, at least for me in the book, was when you talked about the moments where you most loved your mom. And this was where she quite simply trusted her gut and allowed you to pursue your passions without judgment. So not only that, but she also pretended to be interested in your interests too, which I think is always such an important thing that a parent can do, especially for us that are autistic. So I'm really wondering in what ways she showed this interest that she pretended to be interested in what you were interested in. And did you even realize it at the moment that she was pretending?
I did not realize it in the moment. We did talk about it when I got older and was sort of, it was like it become a joke because as I got older, our interests still were like in opposite. My mom and I were very different people. And so there weren't a lot of things we overlapped on. And that was a running joke, I think, for us my whole life, right? That was just, we were like that. I mean, to the point where my mom always dyed her hair blonde and I would never do that a day in my life, right? Like, we were just really that way. I didn't realize it, and she did it a lot, I think. A lot more than I ever gave her credit for, right? I had weird interests. I like science. I like discoveries and facts and all the... My mom didn't like those things. She liked nail polish and going shopping and getting her hair done and going out at night with her friends and things like that. She didn't like those. She didn't want to go to, the museum for fun. That wasn't fun to her, right? But she had to do those things with me because I think more important to her and more important to most parents was seeing me be happy, right? And that she could sacrifice the boring museum if I didn't find it boring. Because there were other times that she would see I'd have to sacrifice my joy when I'd have to go to things I didn't want to go to and stuff. Definitely, she would take me places. That's definitely was a big way that she showed her that. But I think more than anything, and sounds so sad, but I hope parents are listening, she tolerated it. But that didn't mean a lot of adults were like, all right, Becca, we know you love cats. We know you know everything. Could you just, right? and an impatience with it and the inability to put themselves aside and just listen for the sake of me. And, that it was our way to engage. And I think that's the piece that I want parents to seek away from it. It was like, it didn't matter that she was speaking. It was an effort to meet me where I was at. It was an effort to share language with me. It was a way for us to communicate. It was us doing something together instead of me doing it parallel with her. And that's what she was looking for, was that engagement. She was looking for that part of the relationship that doesn't come naturally to me. And so that's kind of where we found. And so she would tolerate it a lot. And she supported my habit, is what I want to say. Because as autistics, you guys will all know that, like, if we get into something, like, we're into something. So, like, my current things that I'm into, I'm like, I love rocks. I've always loved rock. If I pass, like, a rock or gem store, Lord knows, hold me back, tie my hands behind my back. I do not have that kind of money, right? And it's like, that's where I'm at. But she would support me. She would say, the one I remember the most, because it was such a failure, was that I really got obsessed. I was obsessed with the way that when the Earth moves, our stars change, right? So in the summertime, we see different constellations. In the wintertime and all of these things. And the northern hemisphere sees different things than the southern hemisphere, blah, blah, blah. And so I really wanted to recreate in glow-in-the-dark stars, because they were very cool at the time, on my ceiling, right? The northern hemisphere in winter, because I love Orion. It's one of my favorite constellations. And I was like, right? That's what I want. So I was like, I'm going to do that. But, I was like 8. So a couple of things were in my way. First of all, I can't really reach the ceiling. No problem. I was going to did it over my bed so I could just jump and stick and jump and stick and jump and stick, right? No problem. So I had that part down. And then I was like, I was all ready to do it. And I started, but I had forgotten proportion, Doug. And really, I have to tell you, Orion, I started everything too close together, and then it wasn't right and all that. So by the time I was finished, it was a really poorly done, trying to squish the northern hemisphere just on top of my twin-size bed, because that's all I could stick. I lived with that till I'm in my 20s, I think, on my ceiling. Yeah, like, she just was like, okay, I'll go get you more. Okay, you need another map. We'll go get another map. Okay, you want to jump on your bed and stick stars to your ceiling? Please don't break your neck. And those were the ways that she really supported me, that she tolerated, that she went on the journey with me. Certainly not by choice, but you know what I mean? It was like, those weren't ways that she would have, I think, chosen to have a relationship with her daughter. But that's what we got. And so she rolled with it. And that was pretty cool.
Were those sticky stars, were they difficult to pull off? Like, because my visual spatial skills are not very good, so I'm sure I would have really messed up, and then it would have been the wrong spot. And then it would have driven me crazy.
Well, yeah. So it was hours of that, Doug. Hours of jumping, sticking, hours of jumping, grabbing, pulling it down, right? But my autistic brain was obsessed and, like, fully joyful that I was doing this thing. And that's what it was, that she was, and there were lessons, right? I mean, man, can I do to the northern hemisphere now? Probably not anymore. But for a while there, I could have named a lot of constellations, right? And if that was where my special interest wanted to take me, who knows what I'd be doing now, right? So that was, those were the moments that I think we shared. Because then even later, when I was like 16 or 17, she'd be like, remember when you did that? And we'd laugh about it, right? Because it's when those are those memories, and you're allowed to laugh at yourself, which autistics don't usually get that privilege to laugh at ourselves. So, yeah.
I'm so terrible with science. Like, people would show me, like, the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, looking up at the sky and be like, what are you looking at? I don't see what the heck you're talking about.
I think I was just obsessed with it because I lived in New York City and couldn't see it. Yeah. So it didn't seem real to me. Right? Like, how can people see these things? Like, it just didn't seem real. And when I looked at it in books, it looked nothing like my sky, and so I was like, I don't know. And then, you go to the country and it's different. Where I live now, I see everything.
So if your mom had the opportunity to read this book, what do you think she'd say about it?
I'm not sure. I think about that a lot, actually, because I'm fairly certain she would have cried, because I probably wouldn't have told her. See, this is the thing. Autistics will understand. I probably wouldn't have told her while I was writing it. I probably would have waited until I was finished and then let her, like, read before it got published, let her read you know what I mean? I don't think would have been ready to share it with her until it was like a complete project. But I imagine that she would have cried because, certainly she was looking for these answers, and certainly the book, it would have been helpful to her. But also, she lived with me at a time when I was 3 years homebound and suicidal. So to see the same daughter go from her deathbed, essentially, to being a published author, I'm sure it would be really profound.
If I was writing a book, which I don't think I ever will in this lifetime, I probably would have done something similar to you. I think I would have told my mom I'm writing the book, but I would have given her so few details, she would have no idea what's going on. And it'd be like,
don't worry about it. I'm doing it. Right.
I'm doing this book thing. Yeah. There's going to be some stuff in there. And then I just hand her the book one day.
Right. Exactly. That would be my plan. Right. Because, that's the mom relationship. Right. And also being an autistic, I think we take pride in what we do. And so the idea of showing somebody something that's not finished, it's weird. Right. It's like, no, let me show you what I made, like the whole thing. And so, I wouldn't have done it, but I'm sure it would have been profound. And I challenge you, Doug. I think you have a book in you. You just need the right person to help you. And I will never not push you. So
we'll have to talk about that some other time. Writing 1,000-word article is just very stressful to me. It's like, I don't know how people keep going and just I don't know how, I'm so impressed by your book and so many other people that write books. I don't know how you keep going in that process.
And I think this is what I was stuck there too.
Yeah.
Like how? I don't know. But what I needed was somebody who knew how to do it. And that's exactly autistic problem, period. We're not really taught directly how to ask for help and who to ask for their help from properly. Right. But when you find the right person to help you with the thing is never as hard as we imagined it to be. And so really a book is just lots. So it's like a bunch of 1,000 articles, right? 1,000-word articles put together that it just they're aligned and they make sense together. That's all. And so I think understanding that, breaking it down into its bits and parts takes away some of that scary. Yeah. But sharing your stuff, that I can't help you with. That's your personal, sharing your inner things is different. That part's on you.
That part, I don't think I'm too worried about it. I guess it's just what you were just talking about, the executive functioning of it all, I think is the part that makes me fearful of the process.
But I did it so autistically, Doug, really. And I hope people are listening too about this part. If you have if you have things you want to do, right? And you think you can't do it because of something like executive functioning, not because you don't have a willingness. Doug has a willingness to share his stories, right? But he's talking about the executive functioning piece. That's a barrier to completing that, right? And so I feel like that happens to us a lot. And so I had to break it down into steps, and then I had to autisticize it. So I had to say, okay, I am choosing these 3 months to write my book in. I'm going to start it and finish it in these 3 months. And I literally scheduled in my writing sessions, and I did them on Mondays and Thursdays for 4 hours on Mondays and Thursdays for 3 months. So all I did was routinize it. And so, it became a process and a routine and a habit for me, which was great. And I'm trying not to lose it. I'm trying to still write in those areas and not book meetings in those areas to have that space.
Now, it's very difficult for me to complete reading a book, but I devoured your book very quickly. I read it on Kindle, which might be a good thing for me in the future. Maybe Kindle works better for me for some reason. But I don't know if that's really true. I think it was just I was inspired to read your book. Always bring your sunglasses and other stories from a life of sensory and social invalidation. Now, how can our listeners learn more about your book? And even more importantly, buy your book and read it, because they definitely won't be sorry that they did.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate all of the compliments. The book is on Amazon right now, so you can head over. I think it might still be free on Kindle Unlimited if you have Kindle Unlimited, but otherwise it's on there for Kindle and in paperback, whichever is your pleasure. If enough of you buy it, they will have me do an audiobook. So if you're looking for the audiobook, go out and buy the print copy and I'll get you an audio copy because I'm going to be they make those decisions based on sales. And so if you buy the book, there's more chance that I'll be able to do an audiobook. And I think I would read it by myself. I think I would read it. I don't know how people feel about that. I'd have to take temperature because some people find it distracting for it to be the real author and not a voiceover person, right? And other people prefer hearing the author. So I'm curious I prefer hearing the real author, but that's just me.
Me too. I think I'd prefer hearing your voice reading the book.
Yeah, I think so too. So I'm hopeful for that. So go get it. If you leave me your review, I appreciate that. I read every single one of them, and I can't even tell you, as a writer, as an advocate, I do most of my everything into an empty room by myself. So hearing your reviews and knowing you're out there buying it, or you're finding me on social media, if that's where you want to find me, on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, please find me. I do love hearing from you. I love knowing that you read it. I love knowing that it touched you. I love knowing that you needed it too, actually. I just want to know that people are interested. I'm hoping that they will be. It's a short book intentionally. It's a fast read intentionally. It is ADHD friendly. It is friendly for busy parents. It is that kind of thing. I didn't want it to be a monolith for people.
You always have lots of different projects going on. So now that the book's over with, what are you working on now? What's next? What would you like to share with our listeners?
Well, my next big thing is that I'm reliving my course. I just finished re-recording Self-Defined Living, A Path to a Quality Autistic Life, which is my self-study course that is a personal development course that works great for late diagnosed autistic adults. Though I seem to be finding that any autistic adult, even if you were diagnosed earlier in your life, it seems to be working for those folks too, which is fantastic. It will be available. I think it's going to be on authorincubator.com/self-defined living, but you'll be able to find it on my website, which is trulyinclusiveleadership.com, or my old coaching website, which is beccalory.com. And so that'll be out soon, and that's a self-study course, and it comes with some group coaching calls. So I do those on Thursdays. So you watch the lecture by yourself, but then you can meet with me and other people who are taking it and talk about life and how it actually plays out in the real world, and get unstuck there too. So check that out. What else? And I've got some research coming out soon too. I'm doing research on autistic quality of life, and that should be published in the next few months. And I'm continuing to work on that. So I'm working towards a kind of a self-use, or you can use it with a clinician, but an assessment for yourself about autistic quality of life based on what autistics think quality of life is and what autistics believe makes up our quality of life. So hopefully we'll get that, and we'll be able to use that tool before I am in the grave.
Well, I always love self-assessment, so I will be excited for that, certainly. Well, Becca, thanks so much for coming on again and talking about your book. I was excited to talk to you about it, and I don't know how many more episodes of Autism Story are in me at this point. I have over 340 at this point.
Oh my God, Doug, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's you guys, if you don't understand, go look at some podcasts and understand how many never make it past 50.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
It is. It's really amazing. Congratulations. It's a big deal.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Becca, and I know we'll be talking very soon.
Absolutely. Have a good day, Doug. And thank you guys for listening.
Thanks so much to Becca for the conversation. To learn more about Becca, her book, and her course for autistic people, please check out the links in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you, and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode. If you've ever considered for yourself writing a book. If so, we'd love to hear about what inspired you to write. Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to lead self-directed, purpose-driven lives through customized life coaching and our community groups. Our distinct approach prioritizes each client's unique goals and preferences, fostering a sense of agency and promoting self-advocacy. Coaches work collaboratively with clients to develop personalized strategies and tools that can help with executive functioning, emotional regulation, relationship building, stress management, and much more. We also support parents and partners of autistic individuals by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. With our accessible remote services, individuals from any location can receive the assistance and mentoring they need. Join us today to experience judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for our autistic identity. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories, and if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone else you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to autism stories, it would be very much appreciated. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.